Even though I promised to myself that I will not wish people a Happy New Year after last weekend, I will make an exception just for you. So I really do wish you everything that you have always wished to achieve in your private life, in your professional lives this year in 24. What IEL can do to make you feel better in your professional life, we will certainly try to do. And one way of perhaps also reaching some sort of community spirit in the community of linguists of the English language is to attend this online expert forum that takes place once a month. And the good news for 24 is as of next month, it will not be my face that you will be seeing here in the function of a moderator, but it is really within the IEL board that we want to circulate the responsibilities and also the choice of topics, etc. So I'm very happy, for example, to say, first of all, welcome again to Merja Kitu, our next president. So once IEL be history, she will be so she's the real future of IEL, and Martin is with us, Martin Schweinberger, as the newly elected vice president for the profession. And I can't see who else is there from the board. Claire Childs is secretary. So we'll circulate responsibilities a little bit, and so you will have a little bit of variety once it comes to the host situation. The topic today is the teaching of English linguistics in the education of future teachers, so the role that English linguistics plays in teacher education. Believe me, this will not be the only time this year that we will address this topic, because I think it is true for probably most of us who are attending this, this meeting that the majority, in Germany, I can even say the vast majority of students that we have in English departments will be people who are planning to become teachers of English. And therefore, of course, the question has been, certainly for 50 years already, you know, what is it that the university has to offer for future teachers of English language? So today we want to look at ideas that have been developed for making English linguistics at the university more relevant to future teachers. We will look, for example, at the question of target norms, how to integrate changing norms in our knowledge, for instance, about social media, computer-mediated communication, but also about variety and variation in the world of Englishes, how we can introduce these into curricula and formal teaching and learning. We will hear something about the role of corpus literacy and corpus applications in teaching. And we will look very closely also at questions of formal versus incidental learning in times of social media, YouTube, broadly computer-mediated communication. So we have three experts here this evening. I'm very happy to welcome Julia Schlüter from Bamberg, Marcus Callies from Bremen, and from Spain, from Santiago de Compostela, we have Ignacio Palacios Martínez. The three agreed to serve as experts. I know there are many more experts that could be here, but this is why we have several meetings, and then we have also more experts. Today, we have these three, and they will also give brief presentations on, for instance, current projects and initiatives that they have been involved in, so that we also have some practical examples. And I think it is, even though here we have perspectives primarily from Germany and from Spain, so let's say together from Europe, I really hope that due to the participation of more than 30 people right now, we will also hear about initiatives and perspectives from other countries, and maybe also, and ideally also from other continents. So let's make this an opportunity to bring together experiences as usual. Okay, I just have one very general opening question to our three experts, and they can answer it jointly or they can take turns in answering this. But my initial question before they will give their brief presentations is teaching English linguistics to future teachers still the same uphill battle it used to be 50 years ago? So where are the advances? I'm asking myself. I started studying in 1978, and I think the same questions that I asked at that time to my university teachers are still the questions asked to me and to us today. So what is this still an uphill battle? And is there also perhaps still a divide between expectations of the public that university should teach future teachers what is right and wrong? And our own perception of what linguistics should be. So uphill battle, yes or no? Marcus, Julia, Ignacio.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bernd. It's an interesting question, and maybe I can start with one particular aspect that I think is important. I think, despite the fact that we have seen changes in that, I think linguistics is gaining ground, both, in secondary school, but also, in the university curricula. It's still not a level playing field, I think. We're still sort of like, battling against this disadvantage that we have in general in terms of linguistics and linguistic variation and all things to do with language. They are, I think, grossly underrepresented in the secondary school curricula. And also they are not maybe the most favorite discipline for teacher students. So who are more into the kinds of discourses and issues that have to do with literary and cultural studies, because they are used to this kind of discourse, from the school context. And of course, we are fighting, as you said, against this seemingly, unreconcilable contrast between, prescriptivism, what's right, what's wrong, that students expect, that maybe parents expect, and what we do in linguistics. We are interested in variation, in change, and, the reasons for that. So in a way, when students arrive, they are met with this kind of, shock almost, that, suddenly all they had known about English is being questioned. And of course, that's something that is not helpful. So we have to sort of like, fight a little bit against that, I think. So that's at least this one aspect that I see still being persistent.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. Julia, Ignacio, you have something to say on this?
Okay, yes, I got something to say. Well, first of all, good evening to everybody, and thank you for having invited me to be here with you all. It's a great pleasure and a great honor. As regards your question, well, I would say that there has been always a general principle in applied linguistics that used to say that any change in linguistics had a reflection on language teaching. And this was true to a certain extent at the beginning, with the so-called the traditional methods, the grammar translation and all that. But later on, as the linguistics evolved, there was also a change in language teaching with an emphasis on communication, and then we got all the the communicative methods, so forth. This general principle, I think, is not applying anymore lately. I think there have been new developments in linguistics, with all and new developments also in linguistic research that are not bringing about changes in language teaching, and as a result, is not bringing changes in teacher training, teacher development, and teaching education. I would say that in most teaching programs nowadays, there is an emphasis on teaching methodology, and very little attention is paid to linguistics. And I think this is one of the challenges that we have to address. At least from the perspective of Spain, I can see that the teacher training programs, in-service teaching programs, as I said before, there is an emphasis on teaching methodology. So teachers are trained in the use of new technologies, in the use of new programs, in the use of new applications. but very little is said about the new developments in the English language. So I can see, I don't know whether that's also the case in other countries in the world, in other parts of the world, but at least that's the case here in Spain. I can see there is a big gap. I mean, teachers have developed to a certain extent as regards the methodology that they are using, the language teaching methodology, but still, as regards the linguistic side, well, they are using the knowledge they had when they graduated at school and or at university, and that has evolved lately, as you all know, quite a lot. So I can see there is a big gap, and I think that we as academics, we as university teachers and professors, we got a responsibility, and we should do something about that.
Full stop, exclamation mark, Ignacio. So Julia, your comment on this initial question?
Yeah, I would also argue that we need more linguistics for future English teachers rather than less linguistics, because of the important role that the English language is playing nowadays as a world language, and it's also coming into youth culture everywhere in the world, basically. So students come with a lot of background in various media communication in English, and virtually anyone in their professional lives will need English for communication as a lingua franca. So that means, yeah, lingua franca English is, however, not something that is an adequate teaching model. The teaching models that we still have are basically standard British English, standard American English. But native speaker English is maybe a frustrating goal to achieve for learners, especially since the varieties are all around us and not just one target variety that a native speaker would use. So I think future teachers have to know a lot more about linguistics, in particular sociolinguistics, or the context of communication, and they have to develop some kind of awareness of what is adequate in a certain context. The problem being, of course, they have a responsibility for their learners as well as for the institutions that pay them, right? So for learners, they might have to fill their immediate needs and somehow integrate their learners and their background, their lives into English classes. But on the other hand, they also have to teach the norms for institutional purposes and for high stakes examinations and so on. So I think teachers need to know all about this. They need some kind of dual competence, and maybe teacher training is not quite the right thing, but it should be called teacher education, so that teachers can actually develop a kind of meta-awareness of norms and see when it is appropriate to teach norms and when it is appropriate to deviate from them. Because communicative purposes and any part of a lesson has a different purpose, right? So the linguistic means basically have to suit the purpose, and that can be a communicative one. It could also be a perfect grammar from time to time, right? Or increasing someone's vocabulary or native-like pronunciation. So I wouldn't do away with native norms as a target, but there is a large way to go, right? And we should not try to frustrate learners, but to pick them up where they are.
Well, thanks a lot, Julia. I mean, all of you will have noticed already, and this doesn't come as a surprise, that the perspective today is very much the one on educating teachers of English as a foreign language. Okay, of course, it's a different cup of tea. I take it when I see, for instance, Kate or so, and Kate Burrett from Australia, and you talk about teacher education in the Australian context or so, then you also think very much about, native speaker students who want to become teachers of English. That's a different situation. So the focus will be very much a kind of TEFL perspective this evening. And let me just briefly say how we will continue now, so that you simply know roughly what the time schedule is. Each of the three experts has prepared a brief presentation of 6 to 7 minutes where they can present their own view and their own take on the role of English linguistics in teacher education, and they will report on one particular initiative or project that they are currently involved in. After these three presentations, I will immediately open the floor to the audience, so you can just write down your questions already while you are listening to the different talks. And you may also, while they give their talk, write a question in the chat, and I will report. So whatever you want. We will record, just this presentation part, we will stop recording once the last presentation has finished, because we want to give this a kind of protection, and you can ask your questions without being recorded and find your face then in the YouTube recording on our YouTube channel. So just that you know what's going to happen. Normally, our meetings last for 60 minutes, but if there is an interesting discussion going on, we can easily go on for another 20 minutes or so. But believe me, certainly by after 90 minutes at the very latest, we will draw a line, maybe earlier already. But there will be plenty of time for discussion. This is all I wanted to assure you. But now we have the presentation part, and the three experts agreed on a certain order, and they decided that Markus will actually start, and he has prepared his presentation already. Markus is a full professor of English linguistics at the University of Bremen in the very north of Germany, and he's done a lot of research on variation and innovation in L1 and particular in L2 varieties of English. He is a founding editor of the International Journal of Learner Corpus Research, and served as a vice president of the Learner Corpus Association. So learner corpora is an important aspect of his research, and using corpora also for teaching World English is another strong point. And this is exactly what I think where you can continue, Markus.
Okay, so can you hear me all right?
Yeah, and we
see
can
the
see all right.
presentation. Great, thank you very much indeed for giving me the opportunity to share some of the things that we've been working on in the last few years here. I would like to focus on the curriculum, university curriculum for future English teachers, and we'll look at the specific issue of world Englishes, so variation across Englishes spoken in the world, and how that can be integrated, with a view to other disciplines that are relevant for teacher education. The point of departure is that, we know from research and education that students, in teacher training programs often report a fragmentation of the many disciplines that are involved in teacher education, and also some kind of fragmented disciplinary knowledge, so that they're not quite clear how the many things they actually have to study in the programs, actually play together. And this also leads them to oftentimes question the relevance of specific knowledge that they are exposed to. And I think we can relate to that, at least from my point of view. This also applies to linguistics and English linguistics. So many teacher students ask, so what do I need linguistics for? I want to be a teacher. So apparently this is not quite clear, from the way that our curricula are structured. So I would argue that we need greater curricular coherence between the different subject areas that are involved in teacher education, and we can achieve that by crossing disciplinary boundaries. And in the long run, of course, the aim is to enable students to perceive that linguistic knowledge that they will acquire to be relevant and to be linked to educational reasoning. And the one issue that we have picked out, or the thematic area that we have identified that is useful to assure or as a test bed, if you wish, to do that, is of course the spread and the diversification of English around the world, which is now our global lingua franca. And, despite that development, and many of these aspects were mentioned by Julia in her question in her answer to the first question, is that we find that in English language teaching and also in language teacher education, there is still this very sort of like traditional focus on standard English, which is then, equally either British or American English, or indeed, a mix of the two. So the diversification of English, of course, has significant implications for teacher education, such as what are adequate norms or standard varieties or reference varieties that should be used in teaching, what are contexts, English-speaking cultures that should serve as such target varieties, who are the target interlocutors for today's learners. We just heard about, the use of English as a lingua franca. That's a context that's very different from, one particular native variety that is being privileged. And of course, in view of the massively diverse input that students are receiving, also online, of course, there are implications for their comprehension skills, for their listening skills, but also for teachers' assessment practices. So what is an innovation? What is a kind of, a variant of a certain variety? What is a deviation? Yeah? So this is a can of worms. But of course, these are significant implications that, we need to attend to, I think, at some point. So what we were doing was we were sort of like facing this gap. So there's another gap between this exclusiveness that we see in educational contexts, that strong focus on British English and American English, on the one hand, and of course, this what we have been working on in the field of English linguistics in the last couple of decades. So the linguistic research into the plurality, inclusivity, and equality of world English. So we need to help this poor teacher student here to bridge the gap and to gain access to this knowledge that we have been producing in English linguistics. So in our project, Varieties of English in Teacher Education, we had two aims. We want to bridge the gap between English language education and English linguistics on the one hand, and also the gap between theory and practice in university teacher education. And the project is contextualized within this emerging, you may want to call it a paradigm shift, which is oftentimes referred to as global English as language teaching or teaching English as an international language. Maybe some of you have come across the two terms for this new paradigm, which basically intends to promote multilingualism and awareness of the diversity of Englishes, to increase exposure to such diversity, and also to help teacher students to develop an awareness of the many pedagogical implications of the global spread of English. And you see here on that slide the cover of a book that we have been editing a couple of years ago with some colleagues from other German universities, Münster, Paderborn, Bielefeld, and there are some other colleagues from Bayreuth, who have also produced chapters. So for Germany, I think this is a nice summary of the state of the art and, thoughts and ideas, how this whole, area could be developed further in the future. Now, what did we do in our project? The particular teaching model that we designed has three components. Of course, a linguistics component, where the disciplinary knowledge about world Englishes is located. We have a language education component, which looks at this particular topic from the point of view of pedagogy. And then we have a teaching practice component, where the two previous components I mentioned are put together and are put to the test in actual teaching scenarios. In the curriculum, this looks as follows. We have basically paired a seminar in English linguistics with a seminar in English language education. So they look at the topic of world Englishes from two different perspectives. Students, take these two seminars in the same semester, and then at the end of the semester, they go to secondary schools and put that practical and that theoretical knowledge together and design teaching units and lesson plans, and try and basically explore how this could actually be implemented in the classroom. Finally, conclusion. Well, there are many things that we have learned, and we believe that it's important to confront them with this kind of linguistic variation, and that they acquire some kind of state-of-the-art disciplinary knowledge that they then reflect, in terms of educational reasoning. In our case in Bremen, we are lucky we can collaborate nicely with the colleagues in English language education. So this implementation I just showed you was pretty straightforward. And I also believe that especially World English is a topic that lends itself very nicely to increasing this curricular coherence and bridge or cross these disciplinary boundaries, because obviously the fundamental, outcomes of colonialism and the impact of the forces of globalization and technologicalization, they are not relevant only for English linguistics or the field of world Englishes, but equally for literature and for culture, in terms of post-colonial literatures, but they have also impacted many other disciplines. So I think, we have here a very nice, phenomenon that we can use to, make a point in that it is indeed possible to overcome that disciplinary fragmentation. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Markus, also for this very concise presentation. For those of you who don't know Bremen very much and the University of Bremen even less, let me just tell you that the University of Bremen is also the hub of colonial linguistics in Germany, right? So, I mean, it's an old city, of course, that has lived off international trade for many, many centuries, and colonial linguistics plays an important role there. And I think these are also good people for Markus to collaborate with. This simply shows also the openness in the field of linguistics to the entire world and the variation we encounter there. All right, I suggest we move on to Julia. Julia is an associate professor at the University of Bamberg in Germany. Her research focus is on corpus-based studies of English grammar and phonology. She's done also very nice contrastive work, British versus American English, but she's also very strongly interested in applications of corpus methods to the teaching of English as a foreign language. And in this respect, she's actually also part of a project that I think she will report on in her presentation. Julia.
Okay, I'll share my screen and I hope you can see and hear me. All right.
All fine.
And the screen as well. All right. So thanks very much for having me. And it's also really nice to see some familiar faces from near and far. So I'm happy to follow up on Markus's presentation because I think they are nicely linked. What I can add to that is perhaps a tool with which we can handle international variation across world Englishes. And then on the other hand, I also have to point out the size of the challenge if we want to get teachers to recognize and accept the existence of variation across Englishes. And I'm starting with two quotes that you can read here. One probably typifies something that we've heard from many of our students. The other one comes from an experienced teacher. So this is actually more hopeful. Okay, what I can add to that is, of course, that linguists have been voicing these concerns for a long time. So here are two quotes, one from Conrad as early as the year 2000, who already said that teachers should be educated in corpus usage because that way they could trigger reforms in English language teaching and they can do corpus investigations and design materials based on corpora. And then Christian Meyer from the University of Freiburg in 2002 has this very nice quote: the use of corpora empowers non-native speaking students and teachers because it allows them to develop a rational view of the authority and limitation of native speaker intuition, thus dispelling an unfounded and unproductive mystique frequently surrounding the native speaker and his or her judgment in our continental English departments. So in linguistics, of course, corpora are one of our staple approaches to variation, and that transpires to students. But actually, the first lesson that I would like to share with you, the first lesson that I learned in linguistic seminars, is that there is no automatism. So if students encounter corpora in research context, that doesn't mean that they actually see the utility of corpora for their professional futures. Right, on this slide, I would just like to briefly outline some applications of corpora in teaching. For example, teachers can they can act as corpus researchers themselves. So here is, for instance, one standard schoolbook rule about collective nouns, but one that leaves many questions unanswered. So this is something that can be addressed using corpora. Teachers can produce their own teaching materials whenever needed. They can also look up information in dictionaries and grammars that dictionaries and grammars do not provide, rather, so they can fill in the gaps left by dictionaries and grammars. And they can also consult corpora to support their correction work, as in this case, for instance, and in that way avoid personal bias and basically access the judgments of multiple native speakers in one go. So these are some of the advantages of corpus applications in teaching. Right. To demonstrate the size of the challenge, however, I designed a questionnaire-based study that I would also briefly like to outline. It came under the guise of an error correction task. And it's a quasi-experimental questionnaire with test sentences, including prepositional expressions. And here you can see corpus data from the GLOBE corpus, 20 English-speaking L1 and L2 countries, and the prepositions they use in certain contexts. And as you can see, there is quite a lot of variation here between British and American English above all, and the other varieties usually crowd somewhere in between. So in this questionnaire, I usually selected the alternative that seemed most isolated from the average of varieties. Here you can see, for example, that Americans go for the preposition on the team, on a team, which is quite unlike most of the other varieties. So this is an item on which I based one test sentence for the questionnaire, and there were several of them. So basically what we are seeing here is just a lot of variation. British and American English are often at the extremes, but to cut a long story short, all the prepositions that I used here are established in either British or American English to different extents. And the results that I got, I asked 27 British English native speakers who teach English at German universities. On the left here, you can see their results. So these British speakers showed a high agreement with the corpus frequencies of these prepositions in the GLOBE corpus, and a low agreement with the American corpus. So high agreement with British corpus data, low agreement with American corpus data. I also included 29 American native speakers teaching English at universities, so those that would normally teach our advanced students of English. And again, we can see that they agree in their judgment with American English corpus frequencies, and they tend to disagree with British corpus frequencies. All right. So this basically shows that the questionnaire did what it should, and that it successfully differentiates between British and American native speakers. Then I also tested Germans teaching English at secondary schools. And as we would expect, based on the mixed input that they get, their intuitions were somewhere in between, with an interesting leaning towards American English usage. At this point, if there is anyone in the audience who could imagine getting another 70 or 80 students from their countries, would be very interesting to see where they are. So if they are like the Germans or leaning more towards American or British English. So I would be happy to send you the questionnaire and compare the results. All right, but this wasn't the whole story yet. The questionnaire had a second part in which I didn't just show the example sentences, but these corpus data as well. And then I asked participants to judge the same sentences once again in view of the variation that they saw in these data. And I thought that this would clearly convince all of them that we're just facing variation and that none of the prepositions that appeared in the questionnaire was actually wrong. But that was not the case. In these quotes, you can see some of the reactions, one by a British lector teaching English at a German university and one by an American lector. Maybe you can just read through this very briefly yourselves. So these were some extreme opinions. Here is one from a German participant, which actually illustrates what my intention was with this questionnaire. So this German said that it was very interesting to see that some of the forms I marked as wrong, without a doubt, are in fact used in some English-speaking countries. So I would have to reconsider whether I would really call them wrong if they are widely used. And then the teacher also states something else that I found interesting. I also realized that I seem to be influenced by different varieties, and I am not surprised by this. In fact, I routinely watch videos by English native speakers from the US, England, Ireland, Australia, and New Zealand, so it is to be expected. All right, but this German teacher was definitely not representative of his likes. So in the second part of the questionnaire, after participants had seen the corpus data, I got results that didn't diverge very much from the initial situation. So on the left-hand side, you see the initial judgments again. So I got quite a number of unacceptable judgments by the native English-speaking teachers and also by the non-native English-speaking teachers. I got a slightly higher number of acceptable judgments, but that was to be expected because the examples were in a way a bit exotic. But then after seeing the corpus data, so in the post-exposure condition, the situation didn't change much among the native speakers, and among the non-native German teachers of English, the number of acceptable ratings even dropped. So apparently, we have to actively discourage this monolithic view of binary right and wrong judgments and only one correct English. So that's the conclusion that I would draw from this study. And to remedy this problem, we're developing, as part of this digitalization project, an open source training package where teachers of English as well as students can become corpus literate. So we have identified some major areas where corpora come in particularly handy. They include, for instance, vocabulary problems, colligations, collocations, grammar, register problems, and in particular varieties. Okay, needless to say, there are meta-studies on the efficiency and effectiveness of corpus use by learners. They generally show large positive effects, so I won't go into this in any detail. But since Bernd also asked us to tell the audience what we have done about this, I have taken some measures, but actually compared to the Bremen project, these are really on a small scale. So we teach linguistic seminars. At an intermediate level, I tend to focus on methodologies and emphasize the benefits of corpus use, also for writing skills, now also including the competitor AI tools, ChatGPT, etc. At an advanced level, I emphasize the versatility of the methodological competence that students acquire. We have also produced teaching materials, tasks, exercises for teacher trainings. We've done interdisciplinary seminars at the University of Bamberg with colleagues from English language teaching and sometimes also from practical language that build coherence across areas of study. I've done some in-service teacher trainings and presentations at teacher conferences, and this questionnaire comes in handy as an awareness-raising element. So I often use that. And we're designing this interactive, user-oriented, open educational resource, which I'm happy to share with anyone. I'll post the link in the chat if you want to access this. Right, so by way of a roundup, I think what is maybe new in this approach is, it's been mentioned a few times, but not very much in the foreground, that corpora are really an excellent tool for handling the international language of English, that corpus literacy can empower non-native English-speaking teachers, but also native English-speaking teachers, but also that the technical skill set of corpus use has to be accompanied by an open, tolerant mindset, and maybe that is the hardest thing. And then I have a few discussion topics, but I think these are things that we can raise later on. Okay, thank you very much.
Just have to unmute myself. So thanks a lot, Julia, for this. I think what is very important also in the kinds of things that Julia presented is that here we have a project that is not only concerned with what are we doing at universities for future teachers of English, but we have actually also work with teachers. So because this is, I think, one of the biggest questions I personally have. Also, given the kind of expertise that many practicing teachers have in English linguistics, what is actually our role in getting these people back, or to offer workshops for these people who are actually working in the teaching of English for many years? So I think we also should not stop at just thinking what's important about our teacher students, but what is it that we can also do for the teachers themselves when they come back to university to learn about most recent developments, for example. Okay, let's move on to the last presentation. I know you will have written down many questions already with regard to the first two presentations. Now comes the third one by Ignacio Palacios Martínez from the University of Santiago de Compostela. That university that will host IL8, so our next IL conference in 2025. And Ignacio is an old hand and a very experienced hand at everything that has to do with applied linguistics, language teaching, foreign language teaching, teacher education, and he will offer the view from Spain and, among other things, also address the issue of target norms. Okay, Ignacio.
Okay, thank you very much, Bernd, for your kind introduction. So since we got limitations of time, I just thought that I would be addressing these three main issues. First of all, the role of English linguistics in the education of English teachers in Spain. So I'm going to give you the perspective from Spain, which is possibly common to some other European countries. Then in the second issue, we have to do with the model, with the target norms followed, and also with the teaching methodology that is being used here in Spain. Finally, I will try to answer this question that I think many of us ask ourselves: how can we make students aware of the usefulness of what we are teaching? And in that respect, I will briefly refer to a project on computer-mediated communication and the application of social media to language teaching as an example. So starting with the first one, with the first issue, that is the role of English linguistics in the education of English teachers in Spain. Well, the situation in Spain, which I think is common to many European countries, most of all the EFL teachers in Spain, they got to complete a BA in English studies, which they got to do 240 credits. And then after that, when they finished that, they got to do a master's degree on secondary school teaching, which is a 60 credits degree. But apart from that, once they complete these BA in English studies and then this master degree on secondary school education, they have to take a competitive exam. And for this competitive exam, just a limited number of positions are offered. As part of the English studies degree, the way, and I think, again, this is common to many European universities, those who graduate in English, those students who graduate in English, they got to do a number of courses in English language. This got to do with the development of language skills, that is written and spoken skills. But then, as you know, they also got to do some English grammar courses that have to do with phonetics, with morphosyntax, text analysis, and all that. And there are also some, apart from these obligatory courses, they also got to do some optional courses on English, sociolinguistics, varieties of English, translation, Middle English, and so on. I got to say that The curriculum is, we got a general curriculum for the whole country, but as you know, the same as is the case in German you got like there are different states. There are in the curriculum there are some courses which are common for the whole Spanish territory, and then there is some variation according to the university in question. Well, as part of the master's degree, students have to take 2 courses on the teaching of English, but it's just on the whole, it's just 6 credits out of 60. So as you can see, that is just 10% of the whole program. As what is the situation in service teacher training? Well, I mentioned this at the very beginning of my presentation. Well, in service teaching training, is limited to teaching methodology techniques. That means that teachers are not kept updated on what is going on in the English language, in the changes going on in the English language. And I think this is a big gap, because you know, these teachers, once they pass this exam, they start teaching. They have to do some training activities, but those training activities have mainly to do with teaching methodology techniques, rather than with the development of the English language, and also with the update of what is going on in English linguistics. And I think this is a big problem, a big gap. And I guess that this is not exclusive to Spain, but it's also common to other European countries. In line with this, in connection with this, as regards when we address the question of what are the target norms that are followed in Spain, well, if you have a look at the primary and secondary school EFL curriculum, you will see that nothing is said in particular in connection with these. There is a direct mention to the Common European Framework of Reference that you all know. But in spite of that, just by tradition, most teachers follow the British English model. There is a long tradition in Spain to follow the British English model. It is true that in the last few years, some EFL books introduce other varieties and accents in the listening activities, particularly in the listening activities where, you know, students are exposed to different speakers with different accents. But I would say that that is merely anecdotal. Most teachers follow a communicative method in the sense that, well, the emphasis is on communication, but this is really only on the surface, because the approach to teaching of grammar, from my observation, is quite traditional, in the sense that, well, still grammar is taught through drills, through matching activities, through filling the gaps exercises, but students do very few conscious raising activities and data-driven learning activities. For instance, corpora that Julia was mentioning, and they are very little use. And whenever you talk to teachers about corpora, they said that they are really afraid of using corpora, because, you know, afraid in the sense that when they see the interface, they find it very complex. They find corpora, or the access to corpora, very complex, and then, you know, that puts them off from using corpora as a resource for language teaching. Now, finally, I will try to answer this big 1 million question: how can we make students aware of the usefulness of what we are teaching? I think that most of us, as university lecturers, university teachers, ask ourselves this question. Because we got a group of students in front of us, and sometimes they are not really engaged in what we are doing, what we are teaching. Well, first of all, I think that students should be motivated. The question, again, motivation is the key word. They should be motivated by taking an active role in their learning. And they should be trained to take up the role of junior researchers. I think that's very important at the university level. And also, I think that autonomy and cooperative learning should be fostered. Well, I'm just going to describe briefly a project I carried out in the last 2 years with my colleague Paloma Núñez, in which, as you can see, is computer-mediated communication and the applications of social media to language teaching. And the main aim was to make students familiar with the language of computer-mediated communication. We also wanted to make them familiar with language variation and also encourage language research, which I believe is important at the university level. We had in total a participation of about 150 students, and it was a multilingual group, multilingual in the sense that, well, here in Santiago, and as I guess in many European universities, we get a good number of international students for different programs, especially Erasmus and other programs. So in this group, in this course, which was an English sociolinguistic course in the 4th year, we
For some reason, we have lost the voice. Maybe it's just me who lost the voice, or Ignacio froze, or what? Or what happened?
In this
Okay.
in this project, first of all, participants firstly answer an online questionnaire on the use of social media. Then they were briefed, they were informed of the concept of NetSpeak, of internet language, and then they were asked to collect their own corpus with samples of data extracted from their own social media, which could be WhatsApp or Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, in any of the languages they generally use, because we also wanted to foster plurilingualism, which is one of the targets in the Common European Framework of Reference. Then, once they had the corpus, they had collected their own corpus. They selected 5 samples and analyzed them closely, and then they presented their results first in writing and then orally. As teachers, we provided feedback, not only the teachers but also the rest of the students in the group. Well, here, I got to be brief, so I cannot deal in detail with all the results. I just presenting some of them. First, here there was the answer to the social media that they use the most. You can see here, well, that as expected, I would say, those social media that they use the most are WhatsApp, Instagram, Spotify, and TikTok, but there are some others which are very little use, as for instance Telegram or Snapchat, and even Facebook. Then, as regards the results that we got from the students in their analysis of their samples, well, we were quite impressed because the students showed high reflection and a high metalinguistic knowledge. As you can see here on the left-hand side, you got the sample of I think this is a message from WhatsApp, and then on the right-hand side, you got the analysis that this student presented, which I think is quite interesting, okay, because, well, she refers to the use of emoji, the use of interjections, the use of exclamation mark, the use of the doubling of letters, or the use of asterisk. And here we got some of the features that they most commonly discussed in the students' analysis. As regards computer-mediated communication, for instance, the lack of punctuation signs, the use of a high number of internet abbreviations, the use of capitals with an intensifying function, also how they frequent use of terms in English when they speak Galician or Spanish, and how also they very often code switch, the high use of emoticons and emojis, the high frequency of some interjections, unconventional spellings, the use of words preceded and followed by an asterisk to refer to a mistake made, or the use of random letters to express laughter, or the high frequency of nominal vocatives, syllable and word lengthening, frequent use of stickers, and so on and so forth. These are just examples so that you can get an idea, an overview. Right, so what would be my final words? Well, I think there is much to be done, and there is much to be done because I think that one of the challenges that university has to address nowadays is transfer of knowledge, okay? And this is something that we got to do with transfer of knowledge, but transfer of knowledge and research to our society, but not only to our society, but I think also to our students. And I think this is important. I feel that sometimes there is not a direct connection between what we teach and what we research. And there should be a direct connection between these two things. And this also applies in the case of education of EFL teachers who, as I said, at least here in Spain, most of the times do not keep updated in their linguistic knowledge. So they know, at least most of the Spanish teachers nowadays, I would say most of the Spanish English teachers nowadays, they know very little about language variation. They know very little about what English is. They know very little about the potential of corpus linguistics for the teaching of English, and so on and so forth. The project I just presented shows how students can become the real protagonists of their own learning, which I think is really important if we wanted to motivate them. And they even adopt the role of junior researchers. Students get directly engaged in the course, but reflecting upon their own language, practice, and the use of social media with all the implications. And that's it, what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot indeed, Ignacio. So to all of you, so you now had the opportunity of listening to 3 accounts of 3 possible takes on how to make English linguistics more relevant to future teachers and also to actually active teachers. We are waiting for your questions.